In the dying heat of an Arizona sunset, when the dust glowed blood red and the desert wind whispered secrets older than any man alive, rugged cowboy, Cade Mercer found something he never expected. A half-starved Apache girl no older than 10, barefoot, bruised, and hiding behind a scraggly mesquite bush with eyes wide as canyon moons. He dismounted slow, palms up, speaking like a man soothing a spooked horse, and though she flinched at every sound, she didn't run. Instead, she stared at him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope that twisted something in Cade's chest. He took her gently, wrapped her in his coat, and carried her to his ranch miles away, never imagining that decision would brand his life as surely as a hot iron over. The next day, as he learned her name was Tiva, learned she hated confinement, loved sweet biscuits, and woke screaming in the night from memories of a raid that scattered her people like sand in a windstorm. Cade had always worked alone, came easy, but Tiva followed him everywhere, sticking to him like a shadow as he taught her to feed chickens, brush horses, and sip peppermint tea when her voice shook too hard to speak. He didn't know how to talk to children, but she didn't seem to mind. He talked rough, she answered soft, and somehow they met in the middle like two strays recognizing each other by instinct. But word travels faster than a horse at full gallop in the territories, and soon whispers spread. Cade Mercer's harboring Apache. Some came to warn him, some to threaten, and some to smirk and say he'd lost his mind. But Cade only shrugged them off, until the night riders came. The first bullet shattered his lantern before he even heard hoofbeats. The second lodged in his porch post, inches from where Tiva crouched. Cade grabbed the girl, threw her behind him, fired back into the darkness, and stood his ground until the riders retreated, leaving only hoof prints and the smell of gunpowder. But because they'd tried to hurt a child under his care. When dawn came, Tiva pointed silently to tracks leading into the desert, her small hand trembling. Cade understood then she weren't just any stray. Someone wanted her, dead or alive. So he saddled his best Mustang, lifted Tiva up, and prepared to return her to her people, if they were still alive. But 20 miles out, in a canyon cut deep and ragged by time, he found someone else waiting, a proud, fierce woman with raven black hair braided with turquoise, a bone-handled knife at her hip, and eyes that hit him harder than any outlaw's bullet. Tiva, with a cry that broke in the middle, part relief, part fury, part unbearable love. Presence made the earth seem quieter. She snatched her daughter to her chest, scolded her in Apache, kissed her hair, then turned her fire-bright gaze on Cade, and demanded why a white cowboy thought he had any right to lay hands on her child. Cade, who stared down gunmen regularly, felt his tongue tie itself into knots as he tried to explain. He saved me. Nayeli blinked, surprise flickering beneath her anger, and for the first time she truly looked at him, at his dusty boots, torn shirt, bruised knuckles, and the concern etched into a face weathered by sun and loss. Cade bowed his head slightly, tipping his hat, and said he didn't want trouble, just wanted to return the girl safe. Nayeli studied him for a long moment, the canyon wind tugging at her braids, and Cade felt something shift in the air, not quite acceptance, not quite gratitude, but something like the first crack of dawn before the sun breaks free. She told him Tiva had been taken during a raid by a rival Apache band. She'd been searching for her child for days without food or rest, ready to die trying. Cade admired her instantly, her fire, her courage, the depth of her love. But he kept such thoughts buried deep where they couldn't betray him. When more riders approached in the distance, the same men who wanted Tiva, Cade, and Nayeli exchanged a single, charged glance, wordlessly agreeing to fight side by side, all eyes bound by a child and the violence chasing them. As the riders appeared on the ridge, weapons glinting beneath the noon sun, Cade shifted his stance, drew his revolver, and murmured, "Stay behind me." Nayeli stepped forward instead, drawing her knife, replying, "I do not hide," and together they prepared for battle, unaware that after bullets stopped flying, something far more dangerous, something tender and unexpected, was waiting between them. The shootout ignited the canyon like a thunderstorm of grit and fury, with bullets ricocheting off stone and horses shrieking in panic. But Cade and Nayeli fought with an uncanny rhythm, as though some cosmic hand had paired them long before either drew breath. Cade dropped the first rider clean with a single shot, spinning to shield Tiva as she cowered behind a boulder. Meanwhile, Naeli moved with lethal grace. They fought not as man and woman, cowboy and Apache, but as two warriors, defending the same fragile thing, the life of a child, who had already lost too much. When the last rider fled bleeding into the desert, leaving dust clouds swirling behind him, Cade staggered, blood running down his arm. But Naeli was at his side instantly, her hands gentle and warm as she pressed a cloth against his wound. For a fierce woman, her touch was surprisingly tender, and Cade felt the Tiva curled between them like a small, exhausted pup, gripping Cade's shirt with one hand and her mother's with the other, a quiet symbol of the unlikely bridge forming between their worlds. As the three traveled deeper into Apache lands, Cade learned more about Naeli, how she'd lost her husband to sickness the winter before, how she'd taken up the role of warrior to protect her people, how she carried guilt for letting Tiva out of her sight the night she was captured. Cade confessed pieces of his own past, the loneliness that clawed at him since he buried his brother, the ranch he ran out of habit more than hope, the emptiness of quiet evenings. Naeli listened without judgment. Sometimes her eyes softened, sometimes they narrowed in understanding. One night they camped beneath a sky thick with stars, and as flames danced in the fire pit, Tiva slept curled in her mother's blanket while Cade and Naeli talked in hushed tones. The crackling firelight cast warm glow across her face, revealing a softness hidden beneath layers of pride and pain. Cade couldn't take his eyes off her, and Naeli, though she tried to pretend indifference, found herself studying him too, the strength in his hands, the steadiness of his voice, the surprising kindness behind his rugged exterior. He wasn't like other settlers she'd encountered. He didn't speak down to her, didn't treat her tribe as enemies, didn't look at her with the cold hunger of conquest. He looked at her like a person, like a woman, and that frightened her more than rifles ever could. But danger still stalked them. The same rival band who'd taken Tiva regrouped, now hunting both women and the cowboy who'd interfered. Cade and Naeli were forced to lead them into a narrow pass where the land itself offered protection, and with homemade traps, falling rocks, and the sheer ferocity with which they fought, they drove off the attackers permanently. When the dust settled, when the threats finally faded, Cade expected Naeli to take Tiva and return to her people, ending whatever had begun to bloom between them. Instead, she approached him, standing so close he could feel the warmth of her breath, and thanked him, not with a simple nod, but with a trembling sincerity that made his chest ache. She told him he had saved her child, her heart, her world. Then she placed her hand against his cheek, a gesture of deep respect in her culture, and Cade froze, afraid any movement would break the fragile spell. She invited him to stay with her tribe for a time, to rest, to heal, to be near Tiva, who clung to him with the loyalty of a daughter, helping elders repair shelters. Their glances grew heavier, their silences fuller, and the space between them charged like the air before a monsoon. One evening, as crimson dusk settled over the village, Naeli approached Cade with hesitant steps and said, "You returned my daughter to me." Replying, "You gave me something too, something I didn't know I needed." She asked what that was. He stepped closer, voice low. "A reason to stay," and for the first time her fierce composure cracked under the fading light of the desert sky. They shared a kiss, gentle, hesitant, yet filled with the promise of two wounded souls healing in each other's arms. Months later, Cade's ranch was no longer silent. Laughter echoed in the yard, Tiva chased chickens barefoot, and Naeli tended herbs by the porch. The cowboy who once lived alone now had a family forged not by blood, but by courage, compassion, and the wild, stubborn beating of the human heart. And every night, as stars glimmered above the vast western plains, Cade held Naeli close and whispered that finding her had been the greatest frontier he ever crossed.